Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Like Heather said, we're so excited to welcome you to the webinar today, which is focused on the role of researchers with lived and living experience in shaping research agendas. This webinar is part of a series that the CPDD Communications Committee is putting together about the intersection of lived and living experience with research. And my name is Rachel Gicule. I'm a member of the CPDD Comms Committee, and I'm also an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in Population Health Sciences. And I am co-moderating the webinar today with my colleague, Bridget Hayes, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Bridget Hayes, also on the CPDD Communications Committee, and I'm a postdoc with the Collaborative Hub for Emerging Adult Recovery Research at UConn Health, where we study recovery support services for young adults who take MOUD. Really happy to be here.
Excellent. So Bridget and I are really excited to welcome four accomplished researchers today who are going to introduce themselves here at the beginning of the webinar to kick us off in a moment. And then we're going to be posing them several questions that we've prepared for our webinar today relevant to our topic. At the end, we are going to open it up to audience questions. So like Heather said, please put those in the Q&A function of the chat, and we'll select questions to ask. As you consider what you might pose, we request that questions focus on speakers' careers in research and avoid asking our speakers to share personal details, for example, about their substance use history. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers now to each do an introduction for themselves, and I will let you take it away.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Emily Passman. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois Chicago Jane Addams College of Social Work. I'm also a person in recovery, and prior to pursuing my PhD and prior to my career in research, I worked in recovery support services, and I was motivated to get a PhD so that I could conduct research that would help expand and improve recovery support services, and that's still very much a focus of mine. But one of my first projects that I worked on during my PhD program involved on-site data collection at a methadone program. And that was really transformative for me because I had had very little exposure to medications for opioid use disorder or really not any type of non-abstinent recovery pathway prior to that experience. The services and the communities that I had been involved with were very much abstinence based. And so, the couple weeks that I was on site at that methadone program, I was really shocked with the way that stigma was really deeply ingrained into the treatment system, and honestly confronted with a lot of my own misconceptions and biases about methadone and recovery. So at that point, I really started to dig into the research on MOUD and non-abstinent recovery. And the more that I learned, the more I realized how little I knew, which was really shocking for me because I had been working and living in the recovery community for 10 years. So my research today really focuses on stigma toward non-abstinent recovery and this kind of intersection between harm reduction and recovery support. I'm particularly interested in stigma and training needs among peer workers. I think peers are in kind of a difficult position because they are expected to leverage their lived experience in their work. But I found that sometimes they don't necessarily know how to do that when their lived experience or their recovery pathway is so different from their clients. So this research interest of mine has, very much been built on my own personal and professional experiences, and I do think that my lived experience makes me uniquely positioned to carry out this line of work because I really do truly empathize and understand that stigma among the peer workforce is a lot of times not intentional, and it's really kind of a product of our dominant treatment system. And also, based on my experience, I really believe that attitudes and behaviors can be shifted through education and exposure and self-reflection. So, really excited to be here again. Thank you to CPDD for giving us a space to have this conversation this morning, and I'll pass it on to the next panelist.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily. My name is Noel Vest. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public Health at Boston University. I come here by way of a PhD program. I earned my PhD at Washington State University in 2019. And then I spent 3 years at Stanford University doing my postdoc. And now I've been here for almost 4 years, which is crazy to think about. And when I think about being here as well, I think about 10 years ago. It really is an honor to be here. But I think about 10 years ago, and never in a million years would I have imagined that something like this, something that CPDD would put on, would be possible, and would have people coming in and talking about their lived experience. At the time in grad school, I was very much so just living with imposter syndrome and not sharing my story with anyone for fear of kind of the bias and some of the things that come along with that identity. And so I just am very, very thankful to be here. And so I struggled with methamphetamine addiction from really the early 1990s to 2002. I entered into recovery on July 1st of 2002. And I entered into recovery actually in prison. I think some unique perspectives or non-perspectives that I had about kind of recovery and what that meant was that, I had never been to treatment. I still have never been to substance use disorder treatment. But I knew that I wanted a career after prison. And one of the only things that I had heard of for someone that had, one of the things that I had heard of for a person that had never worked really a day of hard labor in their life was you could become a drug and alcohol counselor. And so I had been inspired just enough with some of the college and prison programming that the prison that I was at offered, that I was going to go back to community college and become a drug and alcohol counselor when I got out. And I did. I worked for 5 years as a substance use disorder counselor. And the experience was really, really a great one. Again, I didn't have that perspective of having gone through treatment, so I really wasn't sure what to expect. But one thing I learned very, very quickly is that treatment in this country was really not captured in some of the literature that I was reading in the classes that I was taking. One of the biggest problems in my mind was that, the way that we do research, and I think this comes out of kind of the preclinical world, is we have one problem, one intervention, and one primary outcome. And so, again, in the preclinical work, I think that really makes sense because you're talking about rodent models where you can control things and do things very, very in a way that is very kind of programmatic. But what I found in at least in the largest types of treatment in this country, which is the outpatient level of care, which millions of people are in this country, is that really that type of treatment through 12 different people together with 12 different kinds of problems. I would say majority of them are polysubstance use, many overlapping interventions that the counselor would be in charge of, whether that was cognitive behavioral therapy or relapse prevention or mindfulness or medications. And then you would have this single outcome of relapse. And I found that wasn't really being captured in the research that we were doing. And so this really kind of sparked my interest, I think, and I still have this interest today in understanding secondary data or secondary outcomes across time. So while I'm interested in relapse, I'm oftentimes much more interested in some of the secondary processes that are happening. So levels of depression, levels of other kinds of mental health issues, and how those interact with things like relapse or things like substance use across time. And so I'm always kind of thinking about it in that way. And then as I progressed through graduate school, one thing that was very helpful for me was collegiate recovery programs. And as I started looking into the literature on collegiate recovery programs, because I wanted to take it to the administration of our college to kind of justify our existence, beyond holding bake sales every year to kind of fund our program, I realized that there was very little research in this area. And so I think, both of those areas of kind of my lived experience have really kind of influenced a lot of the at least NIDA funded work that I'm doing today. And so with that, I'll let the next person go. Thank you.
Guess I'll go ahead and go next. Hi, everyone. I am so excited and grateful to be here today. Thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Dr. Martha Tilson. I am a sociologist by training, and I currently serve as a research assistant professor at the University of Kentucky's College of Medicine in the Department of Behavioral Science, as well as UK's Center on Drug and Alcohol Research. I have been working in substance use research spaces for close to 10 years, and all of my academic and research training has been at UK. I feel very fortunate to have had an institution that has been so supportive and committed to my training. My research is primarily focused on women's gendered experiences of substance use and related health risks, using a harm reduction lens, as well as factors and services that support women's recovery, particularly at community reentry post-incarceration. My most recent work has also highlighted the contributions of peer recovery support specialists as unique service providers who have both specialized training and lived experience. And I just want to say that I love this research topic, or I love the topic of the webinar today really being focused on research agendas, because I think that for me, the connecting lines between my lived experience and my research agenda are really fairly linear. So as a woman, I recognize that my experiences in addiction and recovery while I've been living those things, and the experiences of the women that I cared about were really fundamentally different from the men in our communities, even though it seemed like that difference often went unacknowledged or underacknowledged. I've also personally benefited tremendously from access to harm reduction services like syringe exchange programs, naloxone, low threshold access to medications for opioid use disorder, safe consumption sites. They were non-sanctioned safe consumption sites back when I was using them. I'm very glad that we have sanctioned ones now. And I can confidently say that I wouldn't be alive without having had access to those resources during my active addiction. So, on top of that, I've also experienced life disruptions and stigma related to having a history of criminal legal system involvement. So my approach in my professional research agenda has really been closely tied to the same sorts of experiences and services and resources that were a part of my own lived experience, because I know firsthand how critical it is that we continue to develop and support these solutions that will keep people alive and facilitate improvements to health and well-being. And it's not just that my lived experience has informed my research agenda. I think that that's very important to talk about and very important to acknowledge. It's not just that it informs the topics or the issues that I choose to study or the interventions and services that I focus on. But I think a lot of folks with similar backgrounds would agree that this is really what brings me to the work every day. It is what motivates me. It's what keeps me coming back even when the work gets difficult. So I just want to say that I'm very honored to be a part of this conversation today, and I'll pass it to the next person.
Hi, everyone. My name is Wayne Kepner. Excuse me. I'm a postdoc at Stanford Medicine. I'm happy to be here. First, I just want to say I'm super honored to be a part of this like all-star panel. I'm kind of a relative newcomer to this space. And to be honest, I'm relatively new to disclosing my lived experience. I graduated with my PhD about a year and a half ago, and I really wasn't, and we'll talk about this later, but I really wasn't out about my experience until recently. So I want to thank the panelists here, especially Noel, who were really instrumental in my, I don't know, disclosure experience. So a little bit about me. I was one of the first patients in a clinical trial of Suboxone back in 2007. I was a freshman at UCLA at the time. I'm dating myself here. But kind of funnily, I've never had a prescription for Suboxone, even though it's been in my life for a long time. How I got it was, I guess, kind of one of my roommates was a patient, and the research assistant gave him a little Suboxone stop sign, as we like to call it. He put it under his tongue. And when the research assistant looked away, he took it out of his mouth and he put it in his pocket. And then he came home, and a few of us had been dependent on physician prescribed Oxycontin at that time, which was pretty ubiquitous. So I remember he came in and there was like five of us huddled around this like half chewed Suboxone, and he would cut it up into little pieces, and each of us would take a little sliver and put it under our tongue. And I remember that feeling of, oh my God, like my withdrawals are gone almost instantly. And it was a magical, transformative experience in my life. And it directly informed my research today. And that was in 2006. And kind of as a patient, I've watched the barriers of Suboxone unfurl year after year. At that time, it was impossible to get Suboxone, right? I remember a few years later, a buddy of mine got the strips, right? He got the prescription strips. And I'm like, oh my God, where did you get the strips? And he's like, I had to go to the shadiest doctor in this back alley, right? So you would get Suboxone at the shady doctor, and maybe in 2008. And a few years later, a friend of mine, not a mentor of mine, had a clinic in Alaska, and his clinic got shut down because the FBI raided his Suboxone clinic. He was giving out too many prescriptions. So Suboxone has been in my life as a patient for over a decade now, and I know personally how it really is the most transformative treatment we have for opioid use disorder. And sadly, everyone knows this. 20% of people who need it get it, even to this day. So my goal as a researcher is to make MOUD accessible to every single person who wants it, because it helps so much in my life. And sadly, of that group of, five or six of us who split that Suboxone back in 2006, two of those people didn't make it and passed away. So a lot of my research is about making sure that doesn't happen as much as I can. And yeah, that's what I got. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, each of you, for being so candid with us in this conversation. And I'm going to move us along to the moderated Q&A portion today and ask our first question of our panelists. These are questions that all kind of are around this topic of shaping research agendas. So our first question is, what would a perfect mentor have told you about how to manage being a person with lived experience in academia?
I can jump in. I've had some really excellent mentors that have uh, been really supportive. I've had mentors that are also have lived experience in recovery and mentors that don't, mentors that have indirect lived experience as a family member. But I'm thinking about like commonalities across all of them, and I feel like they all really created a safe space where I felt comfortable asking a lot of questions. My pathway to research and academia was non-traditional. It was kind of accidental. I was an undergrad student when I started my recovery, and then I took some time off. And similar to Noel, I thought I wanted to be an alcohol and other drug counselor. But um, in recovery, I think we're kind of taught to just put one foot in front of the other and like, do the next right thing, and we'll end up where we're supposed to be. And so that's kind of how I ended up in academia. I just followed my interests and my skill set. And I ended up here accidentally. So I think compared to some of my peers who had been planning for this and working towards this since they were in undergrad, I needed a lot of kind of extra guidance and support. So I've really benefited from mentors who have been really available and approachable, and kind of allowed me to ask questions about the hidden curriculum. And they offered me a lot of opportunities to develop my skills and build my CV that might have otherwise been, a little thinner than people that had been training for this since undergrad. My mentors also told me that, something I needed to be aware of is that stigma is real, and it is unfortunately still alive and well. And there are people in research and academia that will judge you if you are open about your lived experience. People might take you less seriously. And also, once your recovery is out there, like you can't take it back. So I think that was kind of important for me to hear and think about. And at the same time, I think the perfect mentor would tell me that like my recovery is mine to disclose. I think mentors should never pressure to disclose or not to disclose. I think it's a really personal decision that has pros and cons. And I'm grateful that I've always been supported and, kind of guided about, when and how, once I've made that decision that I want to be open, having support around like the best way to do that has been really valuable for me.
Yeah, I can definitely go ahead and jump in here. I too would just piggyback on everything that Emily said. I think that she laid it out kind of very, very well. I too have had incredible mentorship experiences. Sean Mackey and Keith Humphreys at Stanford, and Sarah Trigresser and Sterling McPherson at Washington State University were just incredible, and they gave me really great advice at the right time, and didn't really push anything on me. I think some of the best advice that I got, I'm gonna use like some of the advice that I did get, is that don't let your N of one, your kind of lived experience, dictate everything that you think is important. Don't undervalue your perspective, but don't overvalue your lived experience as well. And that just really kind of hit home to me. And so I try and use my critical thinking skills whenever I can to try and understand those situations. I think that it's very easy in this world that we live in, especially this research world, where we get locked into certain roles that we have, right? And you get locked into the lived experience guy, or the latent class analysis guy, or the collegiate recovery guy. And what I try and what I hope for is that people kind of will see me as more so like the addiction guy, or the mental health and substance use disorder guy, right? That's what I really kind of want to be known for. I think that substance use disorder really kind of it's a level, it levels the playing field. I think that it hits across all different kinds of races and income levels and all of these things. And so I just like to think of myself kind of more broadly as the substance use disorder guy, and I've gotten a lot of support to try and do that. One other thing that I think is very important, and this is kind of my experience now that I have kind of had my own experiences, and then I see other people kind of coming up the chain behind me. And I do a lot of mentorship. I reach out to a lot of people that are maybe starting grad school with lived experience, and I just try and offer my expertise. And one thing that I see happen quite a bit is that people fall into this victimhood or trauma trap where, and it's very easy to fall into, right? You tell your story, you get a lot of like pats on the back of like, so great overcoming all of that. And then you're kind of, you fall into this, I kind of being, this weird kind of rewarding for my victimhood. And that can take a life of its own. And I see it take a life of its own. And I see, especially on social media, where, people will kind of run with that as their identity. And I think it's really dangerous when that happens. Not that I'm like trying to stop people from, sharing their lived experience, but there's a certain level that I think we should really kind of think about. And again, I see people fall into that trap, and most of the time, even in just my 10 years since kind of getting into this field, I've seen people fail, basically, kind of not either not finish graduate school or get out of the industry completely, because I kind of fall into that trap. And so that's one thing that I would always definitely say, any mentor that I had, that's one piece of advice I would hope that they would give in this experience.
I would definitely second that point, Noel. I'm so glad that you brought that up. I'm also really want to say that I want to celebrate the fact that both of you mentioned having really wonderful mentors. That was also something that I wanted to highlight as well. I think a lot of times when mentorship comes up, people will have these horror stories. And so I think all of us have been very fortunate to have really, really great mentors in our corner. And I do think that it is a team sport, right? I like, Emily, that you mentioned having mentors who are, people in recovery, not people in recovery. I think that that's so important to be able to have that multiple perspectives on your mentorship team. Like for me, just from my perspective, being a person in recovery. And to that point, I think one of the things that I've really valued in the mentors that I've had is their ability to honor the different types of expertise that I have. So being a person in recovery, like sometimes I will put on my person in recovery hat to talk about something or to make a point, and that's the perspective that I'm pulling from. But I'm also a scientist, and sometimes I'll be putting on my scientist hat to make a point and be talking about the research that I've conducted, the research that I've led, the papers that I've written. And my mentors, what I have loved about my experiences with them is that they don't make assumptions about which hat I should be wearing when, but they listen to me and they still respect my voice regardless of which knowledge source that I'm pulling from. But also important because they never pressured me to disclose. And like Emily and Noel were saying, and Wayne earlier, that is such a personal decision, what to disclose, when to disclose, to whom to disclose. It's not a decision that should be taken lightly. And so I think that I've really appreciated that my mentors have been really cautious in that approach that they have taken with me as well. I also, this is something I think that gets echoed throughout the halls of academia, but my mentor's focus on self-care has been really, really important and meaningful self-care. Not to generalize, but a lot of people I know that have a history of addiction to substances also have a hard time doing things halfway. And academic contexts aren't always the best at supporting healthy work-life boundaries. So I have always had a tendency in my career to overcommit myself and burn out, and I've seen this happen with plenty of colleagues. So having mentors that ask about self-care regularly, I think can go a long way. And I think it's especially valuable to have mentors that model good boundaries and good self-care practices, because otherwise these conversations about self-care can really seem inauthentic or even paternalistic sometimes. Um, I also just want to add that I love that my mentors have always assumed that I would be successful. That is the impression that I've gotten from them. Because I think as a person in recovery, for me, it can really easily feel like the opposite. I think that once I've disclosed to people that I've had issues with substance use, issues with mental health in the past, there can be this assumption that these problems can resurface at any time, right? Because we understand that these are chronic and recurring conditions that people face. And I know that this often comes from a place of care and concern, but it can also feel like there is this inherent expectation of failure sometimes with that assumption. And I think that it should be the opposite, right? I look at how much the people I know that have that lived experience, how much they've had to overcome. I look at how resilient we all are. I look at all the transferable skills we've had to develop in the process of addiction and recovery. And why wouldn't you assume that people with that background would be successful at essentially anything that they choose to commit themselves to, right? So I feel really fortunate to have had mentors that really modeled that, who have taken that strengths-based approach and always just assumed the best of me and my future and potential. So if I had guidance to give to any future mentors of folks with lived experience, that would be it.
Thank you all. A lot to think about with mentoring there, just even what I can apply today. Okay, I'm gonna move us to our next question, which is, when thinking about defining future research agendas, are there topics that from your perspective are not adequately addressed?
I can take this one. So thank you everyone for your answers so far. I have a lot to say. And like I said before, I was actually to start off, I was pretty, I would guess secretive in my lived experience for so long. And the reason that happened was when I first got into my master's program, I was the opposite. I was very open about it. And I went to this conference. It was a opioid conference, very small. And I, introduced myself. Hey, I'm a master's student. I have lived experience of opioid use disorder. And afterwards, the person who put on the conference is like emeritus professor, like very grandfatherly figure, very nice guy, like loving person. He put his hand on my shoulder and he like bent down and he goes, you know, I really want you to succeed. I wouldn't tell people about your lived experience. They're going to use it against you. I thought that was really weird, but he was like a nice guy, and I was like, oh, he's like an older gentleman. Like things are different now. Like you don't know what you're talking about. But I like internalized that a little bit, so I like notched it down a little bit. And as I got into master's program and PhD, I had similar experiences with really like senior people warning me, like Emily was saying, that like disclosing your lived experience has very negative ramifications on your perceived objectivity, um, being boxed in on all these things that we've talked about before. So I kind of really didn't announce that. And then very recently, I was helping a young guy. He had alcohol use disorder, multiple DUIs. I'll get into his car and he'd blow into the thing and we'd like drive around. I'd buy him coffee and try and help him out. And he finished his undergrad and he applied to nursing school. And on his nursing school application, I really, I really told him you should disclose your lived experience. He was so afraid. He had DUIs before. He didn't think he would get to nursing school, and he said, "Hey, like I'm in recovery now. Like I want to help people in recovery." And he got into nursing school, and he was elated. And as he's leaving for nursing school, he gives me a call and he goes, "Thank you, Wayne. You're the only Asian American that I've ever met in my life in recovery, and this is an Asian guy." And he's like, "If I had never met you, I would never have tried recovery, and I never would have gone to nursing school." And then I had just graduated my PhD, and I thought about my experience and the people who have helped me, and I was like, yeah, like I don't know any Asian people in recovery either, and maybe if I can be a little bit more open and be a role model for other people, it is worth taking the hits, and that's what I've decided to do. And to answer your question, I think recovery and substance use in general can benefit from more diversity. And sometimes we talk about diversity, we talk about diversity of pathways, right? It's like, oh, this versus that, like abstinent, non-abstinent. Um, but similarly, like I went to a PhD, it was a very global health perspective. And on one of my first assignments, I turned in a literature review on needle exchanges, and my teacher sent it back to me with a B, like a first B, right? I was like super upset. And she goes, I challenge you, Wayne. You gave me a USA needle exchange systematic review. I challenge you to do a global health perspective. And I did, and spoiler alert, needle exchanges work all over the world, right? It's generalizable to all over the world. So I think if we come back next year and recovery research, substance use research, lived experience has more of a global perspective, right? Not just racial, but cultural global perspective, individualist, collectivist. Even within the United States, there's many different types of cultures that can benefit from that. And try to understand, do our concepts, do our models of recovery generalize to the entire world, right? Taking a global perspective on this. That's where I would love to see our research go, if I could help it. Thank you.
Yeah, great perspective, Wayne. I too have had those exact same experience. I think probably everyone on this call has, right? Where you get kind of conflicting suggestions from people regarding, are you open with your lived experience? Are you not open with your lived experience? And no one person has. I don't think that anyone kind of understands the society that we live in and kind of how that works. But it is great, kind of getting those perspectives, and it's taught me to, I think, really be. I've had 10 years to kind of practice at when to introduce my lived experience and when to kind of hold back. And so, yeah, I really love what you said. I think one thing that comes to mind for me is how we treat or we don't treat addictions in prisons. This is how I got started in research, right? I would be out on the yard and I just started asking my friends in prison, on the way up to the chow hall, I would ask them like, why are you here? And not like what crime got you here, but like what happened in your life to end you up in prison. And 95% of the time it was untreated mental health, untreated substance use disorder, growing up in poverty, those kinds of things that were really, when you got down to the core issue of what was happening, that was kind of it seemed to be kind of the guiding force across conditions. And so I think kind of having that knowledge and knowing, I know I have many friends that have now gotten out of prison, are in recovery and living incredible lives outside of prison. And what I would say is they all got to recovery in spite of what the prison system did to them or didn't do to them. There are a lot of people recovering in prisons in spite of the dismal resources that are being offered. And so what I would like to know is, how are they doing it? What's happening? What's happening inside them? What kind of resources are places providing, prisons providing to make prisons, recovery friendly environments? And is there a difference from state to state, from prison to prison? I think it's a black box. We don't know anything about, how people recover in prison. This is what I thought I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was going to get into a PhD program, and I was going to do research in this exact area. And I would say that I haven't given up on that, but I've realized that there's this pragmatic approach to your career, and there are structural barriers and restrictions to prison and state level IRBs that are incredibly frustrating and not uniform from state to state. And I realized really quickly that I just don't have the time to waste trying to go through that nightmare of getting your research approved, only to have it disapproved for whatever reason may or may not, be in the near future. And it's a very difficult place to try, at least the way it's set up right now. It's a very difficult place to try and do research, even if you're just trying to understand, not treatment, but just kind of maybe resources on the recovery side of the continuum of care. My hat's off to those that do it and try to do it. And maybe someday, I'll have the latitude and some funding that would allow me to do it. But right now, it's just not in the cards. So that would be one area that I think is just untapped. We don't know how people are getting better within the prison system.
Thank you both for highlighting those really important areas for future research, your own and others. We did have a question in the Q&A about how to follow each of your work. So every speaker's full name is on the announcement. So all of their work is on PubMed, and please do follow that. They may be publishing actively on some of these important areas. Our next question also gets at several of the questions in the Q&A about how lived experience functions as a knowledge source. So we'd love for the speakers to just discuss that. How does lived experience function as a knowledge source? How do you respond to those who think it is the most important source of knowledge or not important at all?
Yeah, I think my lived experience is a good idea generator. I mentioned I've had some mentors that are also in recovery, and it's been a lot of fun, like, talking with those people about their ideas for research and kind of brainstorming together about like what we see, and then looking at, okay, what data sets could we use to answer this question? Like, can we see this in the data? So I think lived experience is great for kind of sparking ideas, but then, as Noel and others have said, like, we're an N of one. So then we do have to look at the data and involve others in interpreting the findings. I have never done research alone. I was actually shocked recently to learn that for tenure and promotion, I'm expected to have a solo authored article. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. Like, I've never done any type of research by myself. And, my research, my primary research area was really inspired by my own biases. So I'm always kind of pushing myself to seek out and understand other people's perspectives on, my research area or what we're seeing in the data. And I think that diversity of perspective and experiences can only make the research better.
Yeah, I'll be really brief here. This is a great question. I think you could answer this question, take an entire hour to answer this question. But if I had to put my finger on one thing, I think what I've developed over the last 10, 12 years is the ability, and it's only kind of through osmosis and through kind of lived experience of being a researcher with lived experience, is that I think I've really developed these critical thinking skills to evaluate fully any situation that I'm in, right? And so, one thing I think that how do we value lived experience as a society, right? Or how does this group that I'm trying to, you know, uh, figure out whether my lived experience is going to be important or not, how does this group value it, right? And so why bring it up if they're not going to value the lived experience that I bring, or if possibly they're going to stigmatize me or think that I'm biased for some reason for it. It's just not important in those situations. And so, and then on the opposite side of the spectrum, it's allowed me to realize that I don't just because I have a lived experience doesn't mean I have to be the lived experience on everything, right? And so you brought up Martha, pregnant and parenting moms, right? I get asked like, well, what do you think about substance use or opioid use in pregnant and parenting moms? Like, this is not my area of expertise. I have zero lived experience. But the great thing is, I have people in my life like Martha that I can reach out to and say, hey, what's going on here? Would you meet with this person? Again, I think that it's allowed me to get comfortable with my critical thinking skills and realizing that a lot of it has to do with the person receiving the message, and if I can understand them a little bit better, I can understand the situation and whether it's a good idea to bring it up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love what Emily said about lived experience being an idea generator. That's so important. And I think, Noel, you also touched on something really important because I wanted to preface my response by saying this caveat about lived experience, right? Because a lot of times, and I'm even doing it today, right? But we talk about lived experience as this monolith in substance use research. And it's not, right? Like every individual's lived experience is so nuanced and has so many different aspects to it. It is intersectional, as Wayne was bringing up earlier. And if you're conducting a study that's, for example, focused on like overdose prevention among people who inject opioids, and you want to incorporate people with lived experience, I would just really suggest clarifying the specific experiential components that are actually relevant for you, right? Is a person who has no history of injection drug use actually going to be helpful for your study? Is a person who only has a history of smoking weed and has never used opioids actually going to be helpful? Maybe to an extent, but also when you're that person and you're invited to have a seat at the table and you have no idea what the conversation is about and how you can contribute, it can feel incredibly tokenizing. So not only is it not helpful to the researcher, but at the end of the day, it's likely to make those with lived experience feel like your efforts aren't genuine or aren't authentic. So that being said, I do also want to add, I truly believe that scientific expertise can never replace lived experience. I personally remember decisions that I made. I remember how I felt in those moments. I remember the sequence of events that played out in my life and in the lives of the people that I care about in a way that people who have not been down that road just don't have access to. But the reverse is also incredibly true, right? When I started my academic career, I had zero scientific training. And it wasn't just that I didn't know how to write papers or apply for grants, I didn't, but I also didn't inherently know how to think about and approach these issues like a scientist would. And I truly believe that we need to have both. We need to have lived experience at the table, and we need to have sufficient scientific expertise in order to ensure that these research agendas are going to be timely, relevant, and person-centered.
Wow, such great answers. I guess I'll try and not talk on the things that were spoken about. Um, just kind of as a general theme, like, this webinar is about like lived experience and disclosure of lived experience. And like, I think every one of us is very supportive of people wanting to share their personal stories. But I will share a little bit of warning stories just to balance out the rhetoric here. And a lot of times when I'll just speak for myself, when I disclose that I have lived experience, I'll get one of many different answers, 90% of them positive, but 10% of the negative, 10% of the time is a negative one, and this is what I always get. Well, that's great, but the problem with people with lived experience is that they think their situation applies to everything, right? And the inherent message there is like, and I hear this again, that we're biased. And especially early in my career when I was like a master's student, I didn't really understand what that meant. I just kind of internalized it and it was really painful. I was like, oh, I guess I'm a biased person, right? I'm biased. And then you get a little bit more education, then you become the teacher and you start like teaching people what bias is. And you're like, actually, bias is a distortion of the truth, right? My lived experience is technically and definitionally not biased. It is contextual knowledge, right? And at Stanford CDI, where we are at the Center of Dissemination Implementation, we focus on contextual knowledge. It doesn't have to generalize to the whole population, but it does apply to certain people under certain contexts in certain settings, right? So having that distinction of like, well, there's empiricism layer, right? Things that, we measure, we can see, we can capture, and then hopefully generalize to the whole population, the whole globe, if you want. And there are other types of information, embodied knowledge that we have that doesn't generalize, but doesn't have to, right? It is still an embodied knowledge source that can be useful in certain contexts. So the question is, how do we make use of that knowledge source, right? And implementation science has these great frameworks, CIFAR and others, that tries to capture embodied knowledge, lived experience knowledge, and apply it to health systems, etc. So the topic, I guess, for us and into the future is developing methods and frameworks to differentiate empiricism from embodied knowledge, contextual knowledge, and how to apply that to research questions. And I think implementation science is in that vein, right? But we have a lot of work to do. Noel just had a great paper, I think in Nature somewhere, talking about lived experience, and it's not my area of expertise. We do have other people who are specializing in this. But yeah, I just want to throw that out for people who are new and people are going to call you biased. You're not biased. It's not distortion of the truth. You have contextual knowledge and learning how to apply that is going to be key for our field moving forward. Thank you.
Wonderful. I really appreciate just all of I think each of you took such a delicate balance in that question. And definitely, Wayne, wrapping us up with implementation science as a place to look for more. I appreciated that. Okay, our next question also is basically been asked in the Q&A, which is exciting that we're speaking on these relevant topics. And a bit dovetails on our last, which is how do you incorporate other people's lived experience beyond your own into your current research?
I'm very excited to answer this one. So I think in addition to being specific and intentional about lived experience and what we mean when we say lived experience, I would also encourage audience members to really be thinking of ways to create pathways into participating in research for people who have maybe different levels of professional and scientific expertise. So, for example, individuals with little or no scientific expertise can be easily invited to serve on community advisory boards, which, for those of you who are not familiar, community advisory boards or CABs can provide research oversight, suggestions on how to improve studies, disseminate findings. I'm a big fan of community advisory boards. With a little bit of specialized training, folks who have lived experience can also be tremendous assets in terms of delivering interventions, serving as interventionists on different types of studies. For example, as peer support specialists, I know some of us have a lot of experience in that area. However, folks with lived and living experience, I think, can also serve in research staff roles and be very beneficial in that way, or they might be students. And again, as we've been discussing, that's whether they choose to disclose their lived experience or not. I think we should always have an assumption that those folks are in our research spaces already. And because of that, I think that it is really important to be intentional about portraying our research projects and our labs and our communities as not just accepting of individuals with these backgrounds, but welcoming. And this is such an important opportunity, I think, for mentorship and for empowerment to let junior colleagues know that their presence in these spaces, whether or not they're sharing it openly, is valued and that they do belong here. And hopefully, if that person is interested, the support and this kind of active encouragement can also lead to an investment in continuing education, an investment in a research career. because it is also especially critical that we continue to invite individuals with lived and living experience to serve in positions of investigators and partners and paid consultants, folks who are really positioned as leaders in the research, and to continue to show actionably that we value this expertise and that that value is demonstrated in ways that are meaningful to those individuals. This is important for so many reasons, as we know. This creates meaningful feedback loops between the research and the other communities. It facilitates representation, which can be really meaningful as well. But it's also about a redistribution of power, I think. And this is especially important because the more scientific expertise I have gained, the more power I gained, the more distant my lived experience in active addiction has become. And I saw several really good questions in the Q&A about this. So on the topic of driving research agendas, if we want to be conducting research that is relevant and timely, we have to figure out ways to create safe spaces for people whose experience is current or at least more recent, by giving away some of the power that we have as scientists and academics and really empowering those community members as the experts.
All right. Well, thank you for that wonderful and very thorough answer, Martha. We are now going to move into answering some of the audience questions. So I'll turn it over to Bridget to pose the first one.
Okay, so we've had a lot of really fantastic questions in the Q&A. We're not going to have time to get to all of them, so I'm going to try to pull out a few that I think touch on subjects that maybe we haven't covered quite as much. So from an anonymous attendee, we had the question, you mentioned the danger of falling into a victimhood frame. Both Martha and Noel talked about that. What are some tangible alternatives to that? Ways to assert the value of lived experience while maintaining balance and not being boxed into a narrative others place on you or going too far down paths that overemphasize lived experience?
That is an incredibly important question, and I will be very brief with my answer. And this is, again, specific to me. This is what I've done and what I've learned over the years is that rather than focus, I mean, if I get in a situation where I'm telling my story, I try and keep it as brief as possible. And what I try and focus on in the story is the resources that were available to help me and help guide me along the way. Right? I had AA and NA in prison. I had a college and prison program that gave me just enough hope that when I got out, I could potentially sign up for community college. Right? Those were resources that were so. Had they not been there, I don't know that I would have had the outcome that I had. And so I always try and focus on those things rather than talk about, again, the kind of the trauma porn thing where we're just kind of regurgitating like I did this and I did this and I lived through this and I lived through this and I came out the other side. Well, you came out the other side because there were certain resources that you took advantage of along the way. And so if you can focus on those things, I think that it kind of helps to round out the story a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with what Noel said. I also think so. Prior to starting my career in research, I worked in collegiate recovery and I chose to be open about my recovery and had a lot of messaging training. And they always said, like, keep it focused on what, like, when you're talking about your story, like, focus on the solution, not the problem. So, like, when I talk about my recovery, I don't even talk about my substance use. Like, it's not relevant. I might, similar to Noel, talk about like the things that were helpful for me, some of the challenges I faced in recovery. But then also because I've been working in research for a while, I think I've gotten pretty good at then like flipping it to talk about the research. So if someone asks me about my experience, I might briefly talk about that and then talk about what the research shows.
I agree with that completely. I think that this is actually a really interesting opportunity that we have here in this webinar, because I would say that the majority of the public speaking or presentation opportunities that I have, I don't even bring up my lived experience. At this point, I've been open about it for a while. I've disclosed it in a lot of different situations. I kind of assume that there's a baseline understanding from a lot of people in the audience, but for the most part, I just think about the context in which I'm presenting. And if I'm presenting as a scientist, I'm going to present as a scientist. And I think I got the guidance pretty early on as well that it's really difficult to have both hats on at the same time and to be speaking from both perspectives at the same time. And I mentioned before that was something I really valued in my mentors and that I feel within my personal research communities and my personal support system, that's something that I've gotten a lot of support and encouragement about. But when I am presenting in a public facing kind of situation, I generally pick and choose, is this an opportunity for me to talk about my lived experience, or is this an opportunity to talk about my professional research and my professional work? And I think that can definitely be helpful in terms of avoiding that victimhood trap or of avoiding being pigeonholed as to just the lived experience person, right? Really keeping a lot of the emphasis on the research and the work that we do.
Thank.
All right,
Oh,
moving on to our next
oh, go
question,
ahead.
which is about disclosing at different times in your career. Oh, I'm sorry, Wayne, did you want to touch on that?
It actually is going to dovetail into the next question. So yeah,
Okay,
go ahead.
great. Okay. I have noticed that disclosure of lived experience is quite dangerous early on in career. As an example, if you have any difficulty in graduate school, it is attributed to the fact of being in recovery rather than the fact that a great many people have difficulty in graduate school. Lived experience of recovery can be more easily perceived as a value added once you are promoted to associate or get some sort of career laurels. Is this a widespread sense? How can we most effectively mentor students on this?
I guess I'll start with this one. And I think this is the time to, um, as a general rule, I personally avoid too much disclosure. I try and stick as much to, the science and the research as possible. When I do disclose, I try and connect it directly to the research question or like the knowledge source. But for other people, how can we support students? I really wish I had known there were people out there. Noel was like the only person that I knew that was, out there with lived experience, and I really relied on him heavily. But there is a group of us now. We have a peer support group. It's called Surly, and we meet monthly. And um, if you're a student and you're struggling with disclosure or what to do, like the best advice I would give is to find somebody like us who can give you direct advice, right? So there is no real substitute for that. Find somebody. Noel, reach out to us, come to our group, and case by case basis, finding people who are going to support you and give you good advice is probably the best way to go. And I understand most people can't do that. And unfortunately, in academia and research in general, it can be quite dangerous for grad students, especially now. Like, I just want to add this, there's this really beautiful push to include people with lived experience onto research papers. I think Lancet and other papers are like, we're required to have somebody with lived experience on our papers. But when there's that hierarchy of like you're a graduate student and your boss knows that you have lived experience, and now there's a requirement to put someone like you on a paper, it can be a conflict of interest and it can be really hurtful for the student. And we don't ever acknowledge that or understand that, right? Now there's a pressure to disclose. I need to get into Lancet. I'm not a lived experience. My grad student is. Well, here you go, right? So the power dynamic is really important. The context of who your mentorship team is really important. If you have a mentorship team that's really supportive, then I think that's a really good space for you to disclose. If not, then I would be a little bit more careful. But overall, there are people out there who really want to help you, like everyone on this panel, and then we have a group of other people. Come reach out to us and join our group if you want, and we can give you specific advice and mentor you through your career. Because we've all made the mistakes. We've all, taken the little hits, and we'll help you with your career. Thank you.
So I'll just chime in and say, this is so person specific. And the reason I say that is because, I was very, very fortunate. I got out in Washington State, right? I came into academia in Washington State. This is a ban the box state. So, I could go to graduate school. I didn't have to check a box to get into graduate school. That is not the case in a lot of places across the country. And so I think that, for me to say, oh, this is when you want to for sure introduce your lived experience, or for sure, like it is just not possible. It is so context specific and so specific around, what your goal is of expressing it, right? And so again, I would just echo what Wayne said, is that, build your network of people that you can bounce questions off of, because these are really important questions and there is no one size fits all answer.
Okay, so the next question, I'm a person in recovery applying to PhD programs. I was a student at a CRP for years before going into the clinical field. What are your suggestions for finding the right research-based PhD program?
The two things I always ask people, right? Because these are the most important things when you're talking about a PhD program or a postdoc, right? The first most important thing is, what is your penchant or what is your interest in statistics? Because, if you're going to be locked into qualitative research only, I think that it just is a different trajectory than people that are really interested in learning all kinds of statistical methodologies to include in their research. So your interest in statistics, like I always ask people, and then what is your ability to get up and move across the country today or tomorrow, or when you get accepted to a program that's not in your community? Those are the things that actually, I think, really dictate where and there's tons of good programs across the country. I think, the programs on the coast are probably going to be a little bit more accepting of you being a person with addiction. I think you could probably include it in your personal statement. I think as you kind of move inwards in this country, I think it gets a little bit trickier to express your lived experience in a way that you can, shift it. And again, we're in a really good spot because, I think with addiction, we're studying the condition that we all find very important. This is our passion. This is not just like checking a box or getting a grant. Like this is our life, right? This is what we really want to do. And so I think that can really come across. But again, you just need to be careful about this. It really is context dependent on the schools and kind of what you hope to get out of them.
I would second that. And I would also just come back one more time to raise the point of mentorship. I think when I was looking at different graduate programs, something that I was advised on early on is to make sure that in whatever program I'm considering, to identify who would I want to be my mentor within that program. And I think that that can be especially beneficial because that gives you kind of a more, if you have the flexibility to look at lots of different programs, right? But that can give you a more concrete sense of what have people's experiences been working with this person as a mentor or within this institution, especially. I'm so glad that Wayne mentioned that support group earlier. I have found that tremendously beneficial for my own experiences as far as being able to ask folks about what does your institution look like? Is your institution supportive? Do you feel tokenized at your institution? And I think that being able to identify a specific mentor within a program that you might be interested in as a PhD research focused student is really helpful in terms of thinking of what's going to be a good fit, not only to advance your research career in the specific direction and focus that you're interested in, but also to make sure that you're going to be able to receive genuine support, genuine, authentic support as a person in recovery as well.
Okay, and then just to finish off, we had a couple questions about incorporating people with lived experience who have less of an academic background onto research teams. So just to summarize one of the questions, what is your advice for advocating for inclusion, such as justifying to IRBs, preparing budgets, etc., for including people with lived experience on research teams?
Again, one of those questions we could probably spend an hour answering. And so again, I'll try and keep it super, super brief. I mean, it's what I've been advocating kind of since day one. I think that that's exactly what we need. I do get a little bit concerned when I see kind of this overgeneralization that people with lived experience are only people that can go on CBPR like steering committees, and when I say that, I mean different types of qualitative like steering committee boards and community-based participatory research project. I just see that we could kind of get locked into those roles, or that's the only thing that kind of comes out of it. And again, I just think that's a kind of a dangerous thing, because I think there are, I mean, just even the people we have on this call, there are people out there doing really, really great research, and people that have really kind of gone up the ranks of kind of the academic career. And if I get a call to be on a CVPR board, it can be very dehumanizing in a way. And so I think that just understanding that there are people with lived experience at all levels of the academic career chart, and it's not just this one, or it's not just this role that we like peers, or participatory community-based participatory research steering committee. I mean, we just have these ideas, and so if we can get away from that and break out of that stereotype, I think it'd be a huge move in the right direction.
Yeah, I'll just add on
And
to
not that that stuff isn't important, because I do think it's important.
Yeah, and I think there's more and more recognition for the importance of that, for the importance of community boards and compensating people that are serving on community boards. Um, and like Noel said, like I mean, you can just hire a research assistant or a student that has lived experience. And I was a part of a training program during my postdoc that actively recruited researchers with lived experience, and it was on their recruitment materials. It encouraged people with lived experience to apply. So I think there are ways that you can craft job descriptions to really make people feel safe, make people feel valued on your team.
Okay, well, we have about a minute left, so I think we might want to get into our wrap up. Before we leave, we want to give Noel and Wayne an opportunity to introduce their new Researchers with Lived Experience Committee, which will be part of CPDD coming up soon. So you can take it away and let us know what that's all about.
Yeah, fantastic. So Wayne and I have been kind of challenged, I would say more than anything, to bring to everyone going to CPDD, this new lived experience track. And so similar to other tracks that they've done in the past, Neuroburst and things like that, this is going to be a track where we kind of celebrate lived experience. And so, if I know that we have a lot of people on this call that obviously, by the looks of the chat, have lived experience, but even more so if you're working with people with lived experience, please put in for that track at CPDD. We want to get as many people as we can in Portland next year at that conference for the lived experience track. And so we're really excited. We've already got some great symposiums and workshops coming in, and so we're really, really just super excited. So please continue to put your submissions in. Did you want to add anything there, Wayne?
I think you did a great job. Thanks, Noel.
Wayne, did you want to add anything else about the peer group that you had mentioned earlier? I know we got a couple questions about that, but if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think after this webinar, we'll probably send out maybe our contact information, etc. And you can just email me personally. I guess one closing thing I would say is I think in academia, there's this like false idea that there's just like not that many researchers with lived experience. We just can't find them. Like I really want to include them in my research, but they just don't exist. And that's really not true. I think maybe the biggest complaint that we have, there's like close to 100 of us, and it's like we don't have enough opportunities. So there's just a mismatch of like the people that we have not getting connected to the research that's available or the opportunities available. I don't think there's any ill will. I'm not saying people are, intentionally doing that. There's just we don't communicate, right? So the challenge for us is going to be connecting the people who have experience to the research opportunities. And I think if we can get better at that, we'll be, in good shape. And that's what we're trying to do with Surly and all these other initiatives is like, how do we connect people who need researchers with lived experience with people with lived experience, right? And like we're all over the country and it's kind of hard to coordinate. So if we can build this infrastructure with CPDD, with NIDA, and with the research community, everyone wins, right? Like we all want research opportunities, and researchers need lived experience um, consultants, etc. So yeah, that's kind of the infrastructure we're trying to build, and you'll get an email after this with our contact information. Come see us at CPDD. Yeah, social media, all of that stuff, and we'll be happy to help out.
All right. Well, I think we're ready to wrap up. Thank you so much to our panel of speakers. We had a lot of great things to share. It was great to listen to you all tell us what you had to say. And thank you to all of our participants for coming today. Just so you know, we are planning to turn this into a series of webinars tackling different topics on the issue of lived experience. So be looking out for another email from CPDD coming up about our next installment, probably at some point in the spring. So thank you everyone for coming and have a great day.